Hello and welcome to Maiden, Matriarch. My guest today is Alex Kaschuta, creator of the Garden of Earthly Delights Substack. We spoke about why modern urbanites are so attracted to tradlife and why what I call unilateral tradlife is so very difficult. We also spoke about the peculiarity of Anglo culture from an Eastern European perspective, whether the right is really capable of good governance, and how access to taboo information on the internet has changed politics. While you can, of course, listen to MMM wherever you get your podcasts, the true home of the show is to be found at louiseperry.substack.com. That's where you can find not only the extended version of this episode, but also the extended versions of hundreds of MMM podcasts, plus the weekly bonus episodes I record with other Substackers and the MMM chat community. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Alex, should we start by talking about tradwives? I think that you've always, have you always been quite skeptical of the tradwife phenomenon? That's my impression, but maybe I'm misremembering.
I've been a little bit skeptical of the more kind of extreme variants of it, the highly aestheticized, people running in a wheat field, and also the like, oh, look what we've lost, and we haven't gained anything, return type things.
Mm-hmm.
But I was more friendly towards the idea before I had kids, before I really understood, okay, what exactly is the workload, what exactly are the demands, what will your life look like? I know there are a lot of people who like to, philosophize and give advice before they have, significant life experiences, and they romanticize them. It's a bit tougher to stick to the serious tradwife script once you have children, and maybe they're a little bit more on the difficult side, and there hasn't been a lot of sleep, and the idea of segregating gender roles in a very strict way and very kind of dogmatic way, that man brings in paycheck, woman provides food, she needs to mill the grains herself, and it's the math of the whole situation doesn't really add up in, I guess, modern conditions. I think in ancient conditions, everyone was, struggling to survive every hour of the day. So I can imagine that the workload and the pressures were different. But nowadays, I think it's, looking at your relationship as something that provides a set of issues that you have a team member to solve with. And the fact that you're going to be inclined towards certain tasks or others, I think that's super normal. But yeah, the idea that, there's a very iron gender segregation, and then if men dip their toes into some areas that women are better at, or naturally inclined towards, that upends the polarity of the relationship, or the story, something like that. That was knocked out of me quite early. So I think that just having epiphanies and revelations in real life kind of put the tradwife meme into a bit more context for me.
I think the hardest way of doing this, which also seems to be the most common way of attempting this in the modern West, is what I think of as unilateral tradlife. So that's where everyone around you, including typically your extended family, are not living trad life. They're living consumerist, daycare, etc. life. And you're just doing it on your own. And the problem with doing it on your own is that actually a lot of it was never designed to be done on your own. And it ends up being both a very hard work, but also very isolating, because so many of the tasks which the tradwife has taken on for herself are actually intended to be done communally. I mean, the thing that I always wonder about, and honestly, any listeners like who have advice on this, tell me, how the hell are you supposed to cook when you're looking after young children? When I watch Ballerina Farm's videos, she's constantly cooking, and then occasionally a young child, and like doing very laborious long form cooking, right? And then occasionally a young child will sort of hove into view on video, and maybe she gives the child a kiss and then off they go. I think, what are the children doing? How are you stopping them from trying to get into the oven? How is it possible that you're supposed to spend hours a day cooking and also be in sole charge of the children at the same time? I guess the answer, if you have a big family, is that the older children can keep an eye on the younger children. But what do you do when you're like us and you have two preschoolers? who want your attention and I want to do dangerous things in the kitchen at every moment of the day. It's things like that. If it makes more sense to do the laborious style of cooking everything from scratch if you're living with your extended family and you have other hands around to keep an eye on the kids and you can basically take turns. It doesn't make sense if it's just you. It's literally just you, the only adult in the house, and you have these young children in your care, and you're also trying to do everything the hard way in terms of things like cooking.
I know I sometimes try to involve my toddlers, Montessori style and the cooking. And it's a recipe for disaster.
Well, I mean, they love it, but I honestly think they should do a round on MasterChef where you have to have a toddler help you because it just makes the whole thing so much more difficult, and it's also it's stressful because you're dealing with sharp knives and hot things and whatever. So yeah, I mean, yeah, my eldest loves it as well, but it
Yeah.
makes making dinner take about twice as long. And what are you supposed to do about the baby?
Exactly, yes. If someone is holding the baby and they're playing with the baby, then my older toddler can help. Yeah, he's relatively not destructive. That's pretty much his kitchen skill. But yeah, just the idea of cooking with both of them. I tried it once and it's like, the baby was half covered in cookie batter. He was interested. He wanted to participate, but it's just, yeah. So the recipe was a fail. Yeah, I think one of the things that is, kind of dawned on me throughout, being in the more right wing end of the spectrum, and being exposed to these tradwife memes, it really did seem like it was a laundry list of activities that women should be doing, like in the sense of, okay, this is your natural place, and here is your to do list. And on the male side, I guess it would be chopping wood and protecting you from wild animals, but that's an occasional task. And then so it's a lot of kind of this romanticism that the women of old would automatically, by default, by their nature, would just complete this list of tasks for the families and the men in their lives, and they would be of service in a way that's going to be fulfilling, apparently, at one point, but does not necessarily have a payoff in this life, maybe in the next life. So I think that was a little bit seeing the types of activities pile up that you or necessarily have to perform to be a good woman. And then on the other side of the tally was paycheck. And as
Yeah.
someone who's collected a few paychecks in my life, it's just it doesn't really add up. So that's kind of pushed me in a bit of a more egalitarian direction. But at the same time, I do understand why women are interested in this. And I mean, most of the tradwife content is not for women. It's especially kind of the more aesthetic stuff. It's for the yearnings of men, maybe older men, to think of a time that they didn't live through, but maybe they could have, and stuff like that. So it's things to send to your teenage niece as inspiration or something. So, but I understand because we do live in fairly ambiguous times. There's a lot of status anxiety. There's a lot of complexity and actually getting a career, getting a job that you might even want to call a career. It's not really clear what your life script is supposed to be. And a lot of this tradwife yearning is the idea that you're in nature, which is something people are disconnected from. To you have babies, beautiful babies, healthy babies. You never see disabled children in the tradwife inspiration pictures.
That's true.
It's a life where everything works out, where the harvest is plentiful on your homestead. Your husband is kind. He's a collaborator with you, even though he's never in the picture, or maybe he's part of the background. It's an idealized life of someone who where everything works out in this direction. And I understand why it's aspirational and it's a yearning. But I think it was Cartoons Hate Her that made this point, that it's actually an aristocratic life that these women are yearning for, rather than, it's kind of, there's a certain class of gentleman farmer who can live this life without issues. If you're an actual farmer, if
Yeah.
anyone's watched Clarkson's Farm, which I've had, it's quite
Oh, let's
it's
talk
very
at length
cute.
about Clarkson's farm
I
at some
love
point
Clarkson's
today.
Farm.
Yeah, I have so much to say on this. Yeah,
It's tough, even for Jeremy Clarkson, who's quite he's got
yeah.
the endowments to fund his farm. It's quite a tough business. So yeah, and I was actually had Lane Scott on my podcast recently, and we were talking before the
She's
show
been
a
on
lot
this show
about,
as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
about the homesteading thing. I mean, she is a rancher, and she's has experience in agriculture, and she just she just laughs it off. All the young people coming to her region and trying to set up farms, and just the dramatic ways in which it all blows up in their face, but they have to move back. And yeah, it's hard, but it's aspirational. It's this wonderful dream that, people may be living in a city with all the constraints and issues and status issues, and yeah, the layers of problems of modernity. I understand why it's there, but the execution of it is really complicated, and it's mostly money and mostly luck as well.
I think the trad life phenomenon is sort of directionally correct in that it's recognizing that people feel a great sense of dissatisfaction and anomie resulting from urban life, lack of connection with nature. I think that, or I think also, I mean, I think you intimated this earlier, there's like a soft version of traditional gender roles, which is about right for most people.
Yeah.
And strict egalitarianism is also really dysfunctional. And if you can kind of accept that there's like a path of least resistance for both of you, but also you need to be a team and not be rigid and not, I think that's the happy medium. But a lot of people sort of have to overshoot maybe in order to realize that.
Yeah.
Because the centrist position is not very well advertised. And that's probably partly because the algorithm doesn't prefer the centrist position. We put out our moderate takes on podcasts, right? But they will never ever be as successful as the trad life slop that Instagram and TikTok serve up. But I still, I agree with you that I feel sympathetic towards the people who are yearning for something different. And that unfortunately there isn't like unilateral trad life for most people is the only way of attempting it. Because actually going away and like living in some intentional community or just having the good luck to be born into a family which is already quite communitarian and also functional is rare. So people running away to start homesteading in the middle of nowhere is kind of the only option you have. And then, yeah, as you say, invariably it turns out it's actually really difficult. I think you're so right that it's the gentleman farmer's wife that we all yearn for. It's the like not actually having to worry that much about provisioning and getting to just enjoy basically being connected with nature. And something I've realized about myself, I also yearn for nature, but the thing I've realized about myself, and it only took 33 years, is that I actually love the suburbs. I just like a suburban house with a garden and a park nearby, but like a relatively manicured park. That's me. That's actually all I desire. And probably that's probably a lot of people who learn for trad life might actually be okay if they just move from the city to the suburbs. I might actually do it for them.
Yeah, and the thing is, you can do tread life a little bit piecemeal. I think
Yeah. Yeah.
you can just have a garden. I mean, we've built quite a significant garden here in our backyard, and we're showing the kids how food is grown. And every year we have a bigger stash of food. Now we're going to have our tomato harvest, hopefully in the next 2 weeks, and we're going to have to make tomato sauce because we have so many tomatoes, and that's going to be a little project. But yeah, I mean, the idea that I'm just going to go buy, 7 hectares of land and, sheep and cows and everything, which ties back into Clarkson's farm, because I think that's kind of what he did. He just started off with all of the farm stuff or very in quick succession got it all.
Do you know why he bought the farm? This isn't really explored in the show.
No.
Because, I mean, so this does link back into the activism he's now doing. Jeremy Clarkson bought the farm because it was a way of avoiding inheritance tax. So in the UK, you pay quite heavy inheritance tax on everything above, I can't remember what the threshold is, like £250,000 or something. And he has 3 children. And a loophole that he exploited was that this doesn't apply to agricultural land. So he thought if he sunk a lot of money into this very large, expensive farm, then he would be able to give it to his children without having to pay inheritance tax. And then, rather tragically, the government cottoned on to this wheeze that rich people were using and have, I think, completely unfairly and insanely have now said that there's no more exemption for agricultural land. So they could have said, we're just going, there could have been ways to tighten the loophole without punishing farmers, like real farmers. But they didn't do that because actually I think the Labour government are fundamentally in opposition to the English yeoman, which is represented by the gentleman family farmer. But anyway, and Clarkson is in this slightly awkward position where he people like him are arguably partly responsible for this legal change, but he also thinks that the legal change is terrible and has been campaigning on behalf of farmers. So far, with no success.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell throughout the show that there is a major tension between him and either local government authorities and state government authorities. Yeah, he's not happy with how things are going, and I guess his impetus to to only sell things that he's grown on his land or only British farming. It's quite an an ambitious goal, but it also kind of teaches you a little bit about supply chains and
Mm,
why things are the way they are. And yeah, it's quite a shockingly educational show for many layers. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it really is. It's also, I think, deeply patriotic
Yes, it
in
is.
a kind of gentle way. And he has this. It's so funny to see Jeremy Clarkson, who's previously famous primarily for being a petrol head from Top Gear, become invested in environmentalism, but in a very specific kind of way. So it's about preserving. I don't think he really cares about global warming, but he's interested in preserving the countryside and becomes very interested in rewilding and in soil health and all this kind of stuff. So it's basically a conservative version of environmentalism that he's embraced. And I think that's good and important, and I like all the stuff that he has to. I've learned loads about the English countryside and also about how incredibly difficult it is to be a farmer.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of been the talk. I would show everyone who's has the dream of homesteading, maybe just as entertainment, just watch the show and and have a look. And even he doesn't have an infinity of money, but he can still bolster
Mm.
his losses and things like that. So yeah, it's tough. So
This episode is sponsored by Relay, one of those brands that is just such a perfect fit with MMM. I think what they're doing is excellent. So, Relay is an app that helps people to stop using porn. It's therapist accredited and has been designed around the most robust therapeutic principles. It's community based, there's a chat function and live meetings with other members who can provide support and accountability. It encourages daily check ins, and over time, users come to understand their own thinking and behaviours and patterns of pornography use. So, what factor is it that makes you fall off the wagon? What can you do, and what support do you need in order to stop using porn? Porn is basically everywhere on the internet, which is why all of Relay's resources are housed within the app. So there are fewer temptations to stray into other parts of the internet and potentially damage your recovery, something which can't be said for the other porn recovery apps. Relay has already transformed the lives of thousands of men and the lives of their partners. The founders are extremely mission based. They recognize the harm that porn does to marriages and to families. Their goal is to help men become better spouses, fathers, and friends. If you personally want to try Relay, or if you know someone who could benefit from using it, use the code Louise at checkout for a 7-day free trial. Head to joinrelay.app/maiden. That's joinrelay.app/maiden and use the code Louise at checkout. Find lasting freedom today. One of the things that I think is really enjoyable about Clarkson's Farm is it's the sort of humor that would be funny to people 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. There's like a fundamentally comic dynamic, which is the wealthy, incompetent boss, and then the spirited, sly underlings who actually he relies on for their expertise. And that's basically the source of all the humor. And he whenever he comes to, like, the episode I was just watching is when he goes to buy cattle at
mhm.
an auction event, which is actually an amazing little insight into like deep anthropology, this guy very, very long standing rural tradition of the way they do the auctions. And he brings along his young employee who humiliates him because he doesn't know what's going on. And you think this would be hilarious to like a Tudor audience who would immediately recognize that dynamic. And I think that's lovely, the sort of gentle family friendly humor of Clarkson's Farm, as well
Yes.
as the
But there's
educational
something
aspects.
specifically Anglo about it as
Do you
well.
think?
Yes, because if you'd have a conflict between underling and superior in an Eastern European setting, it would be an
Mm,
all-out war.
mm,
The leader loses face. Like there's a game, there's a dance that they do, like Clarkson does with his underlings, that he, you know, b- trusts their competence, but he also kind of takes leadership. There's humor in it, there's banter, the hierarchy. And this is something that, my husband kind of points out to me every day, like just the kind of the social dynamics, which is one reason why we're moving to New Zealand soon.
Moving to an Anglo country.
Yeah, we will. We have to return. I mean,
Mm.
me as a sidecar, but yeah, it is really really shocking. And even you go to a restaurant and the relationship between different like strata of society and the waiter, and clothing, and like visible labels, and just the position, how men walk. The more either like high status or in status insecure they are, they kind of puff up like like I don't know, certain types of
Like a
animals.
gorilla. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, they
Yeah.
kind of put their arms out a little bit and make their chest bigger, and they strategically ignore each other if they're higher status and don't want to say hello to like a someone who's considered lower status. It's quite interesting, and yeah, it's at least from my husband's perspective, it's quite primitive. He doesn't like it.
Is this a high trust, low trust society thing, or is it something else?
Um, Maybe. I mean, it does kind of seem that the high trust societies do map onto the Anglosphere, and I guess
Mm.
Germanic, Scandi things. But yeah, if you go back far enough, then they're a very similar mush that these peoples came out of. Yeah, I don't know what it is. It might also be all sorts of layers of history. That's always the explanation here. Like whenever there's a question like, oh, why is Eastern Europe behind? It's still Europe. There's always the thing, oh, we had this oppressive history. And I think that's not wrong in many ways. But there was oppressive history coming for England, and there was oppressive history coming for Germany, and all sorts of issues. But they've navigated it differently, and I think the cultures that they've built are just more, yeah, they're more resilient. I mean, not to talk about German martial culture, that's a whole chapter in itself. But yeah, it has been really tough to be kind of at the gates of Europe here, because you had the Ottoman threat. You had even Poland was its sort of minor empire at one point. You had Austria Hungary. It's kind of like a fault line in Romania, and Romania itself is not an extremely cohesive nation. I mean, we're about 100 years old in its current form. You have Moldova, which peels off and comes back depending on on which major power tries to get it, and then also in Romania, you kind of have the big southwest or south north division, where you have kind of more of the Austro-Hungarian Romania, where I live in Transylvania, and then you have southern Romania, which is more core Balkan, and also culturally, the food, the people, genotypes. You can kind of tell where people come from. We
Hmm.
all speak the same language, but there are heavy accents, and yeah, it's been a very contested territory, both internally and externally. So I do get that. It takes some sort of either material or peacetime, or some sort of kind of a cauldron of elements to form a resilient culture. And I just don't think that this country had the time or the resources to build that. But yeah,
Yeah, I think it's one of the blessings that Britain has had in the nature of being an island at the edge of Europe is that we've been more. It's easier to defend against invasion, and so we haven't been invaded formally for
yeah,
1,000 years. And I suppose, yeah, people are able to develop these deep sense of, I don't know, there is that a Just So story, because there must be loads of other examples in the world of places that have resisted invasion but haven't. I mean, Anglo culture seems to be really quite unique. I mean, it's interesting when you say that maybe when we say high trust society, we basically just mean Anglo.
yeah. The one good thing is that if there is a trend line culturally, it's trending towards the Anglosphere. But at the same time, I know the high trust norms are not necessarily super robust in the Anglosphere. It's I think they're maybe partly tied to some form of genetic predisposition. I don't know how much that is, but they're also teachable. And that one thing that I have noticed, especially in Romania, because everyone's got a certain opinion about the European Union and what its use is. It is an extremely effective kind of shelling point for giving up on corruption, because corruption is actually like social technology. If you have like a place where you don't trust people, you can trust your next of kin, but because of communism, because of liberalization, your next of kin is not as close as they used to be. So now you're in this place with all sorts of strangers, and the only way to get things done is if someone knows someone knows someone, or you go there with a package of something to sweeten the deal. And because the European Union has provided this kind of supervision and has also incentivized people to not lean into corruption and has fired people, and there's this whole superstructure to destroy corruption, it actually kind of worked. I mean, I
Mm.
remember even 10 years ago, you would have to go to the county hospital, and you couldn't just go, you had to bring something, some coffee, some a perfume, flowers, whatever. And now it's just, yeah, it's. I'm sure it still happens under the table as it does everywhere in the world, but it's just like the blatant everyday corruption is just
Mm.
gone, at least from my experience, which is an
Yeah.
insane change, and it is driven by Western norms, because a trustworthy supranational authority has come in and set the rules, and these rules are tied to money,
Yeah.
which either maybe ends up in corrupt places, but at least there is a certain mechanism to punish people for defecting.
When we say Western again, we do basically mean Anglo. I mean,
Yeah.
not exclusively, but
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think a lot of West is Germany, because there's kind of a lot of economic ties,
yes.
and my family's also from Germany. We have like enclaves here. So for us, a lot of the times when I was growing up, we were looking more to Germany. Obviously, the kind
Yeah.
of information ecosystem was American and English partly. But yeah, if we thought about a country that was Western and that we wanted to emulate, it was Germany, because it's a much shorter drive than England, I think, number one. And everyone just drives here because we didn't have airports until 5 minutes ago. So, yeah, I think that's partly it. But, Germany and England are not necessarily, as different as, Romania and England. They still share a common genetic basin, but also, a cultural heritage.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can introduce these institutions and these norms in other places with quite considerable success, but you're working against the path of least resistance more often than not. If you try and bribe a police officer, I think this is still overwhelmingly true in Britain. If you tried to bribe a police officer, they would just look at you with confusion.
Yeah. You know what the good thing about this is, or, kind of the positive thing is that in Romania, if you ask someone maybe 20 years ago if they liked corruption, they would say, okay, no, we don't like corruption. We don't want to live in a corrupt country. We
Mm.
know how it would feel to live in a not corrupt country. But do you engage in corruption? And sincerely, they would have said yes, because there's no other way to get stuff done. So it's
Yeah.
almost like releasing a pressure valve when you have this kind of supranational colonialism where you just kind of put your foot down, and it's like everyone, I mean, maybe not the most corrupt people, they probably didn't want corruption to go away, but the vast majority of people, had a sigh of relief when the corrupt norms fell away, and a lot of them couldn't even believe it. And I remember when I went to college in Austria, and then you had to pay like a little registration fee, and it was a very simple system to get registered for school. And I was there with my friend from high school, because she was signing up to the same program, and her father. And her father is, like essentially a guy who grew up under communism. He came with his little envelope filled with 100 euro bills to give to the guy, and to smooth out the process. And they had to get security to get him out of the building, because he didn't
Wow.
they still registered the child, so I mean the
Mm.
teenager in that case, but they he just wouldn't have say no, like wouldn't take no for an answer. So
Wow.
he kept trying to push the money on these women, and they got more desperate, and they got scared that he
Yeah.
because he didn't really speak German. He was kind of trying to explain to them that this is for them, don't worry, get yourself something nice. They just wouldn't want to hear it, and then security had to be called, and I remember I was mortified. I was like, who are these people?
That's
They're not
amazing.
with me.
You moved to Britain not that long after graduating, is that right?
I came back to Romania. I spent about 2 years here after my
Mm-hmm.
master's. So,
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting pretty old. So there's years have been
You and
accumulating
me
in
both.
this time. So I
Mm.
think it was about when I moved to Britain, 2016. I think that's when I moved to Britain. And I think I finished high school in 2006. So there was about 10 years between finishing high school and my bachelor's, my master's. doing some work in Romania, and then moving to
Mm.
Britain.
What did you make of it in terms of this culture clash when you arrived? Had you been sufficiently Germanized that it
Oh
wasn't
yes, oh
surprising?
yes. I've always been a little bit of an odd one out here. That I
Mm-hmm.
was kind of always rebelling against the culture, and yeah. So for me, it was a relief to be on firm soil in terms of public morality and high trust and all that. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought like I mentioned before on other podcasts, it's it was a little bit red pilling in the kind of making you right wing sense,
Mm-hmm.
because I was working in the city of London. For me, it was easiest to live in East London. It was also a cool neighborhood to live in. I lived all over East London, and some of the places that I lived in were just shocking to me in terms of crime. They were just
Mm.
stabbings. There were muggings constantly. People selling drugs just on my doorstep. Yeah, it was just very disconcerting why the police couldn't intervene. And for me, that was kind of a bit of a milestone. I thought, okay, this was also something that wasn't, nice to bring up in polite conversation with people. It kind of made you
Mm.
stand out as a bit of a pariah. Like, why are you interested in this? Why is this relevant to
Yeah.
you? I mean,
Yeah.
I was interested in it because I didn't want to get stabbed or things like that. And yeah, I think a lot of people just have this idea that they're going to make more money and they're just going to move out of the bad neighborhoods. And the bad neighborhood is just kind of a tax that you're supposed to pay. But I thought, there are very simple methods to sort this out. You just kind of have to enforce the law. And the fact that this was just like, ooh, you know, stay in your lane, think about something else. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder sometimes whether the good aspects of Anglo culture that we've talked about necessitate some of this, at least some of this, the softly approach to crime. I mean, my husband is like endlessly interested in this because he's so interested in criminology. But the Peelian model of policing, named after Robert Peel, who founded the Met Police, which is the policing by consent model, where police are very demilitarized and they don't carry guns. They basically carry sticks and that's it. And they are dressed like they don't dress like the gendarmerie, for instance. They basically wear a suit and like a silly hat. That model prevailed for 2 centuries ish, but only in Britain. That was not the model used in the colonies. In the colonies, it was much more militarized. It was much more explicitly racist in the sense that you really did in practice have different laws depending on which ethnic group you belong to, and the model was to prevent race riots and maintain British rule. So to some extent, I think that the idealized image of British policing that has prevailed up until now was kind of a product of a slightly false distinction between the way that British policing operated here and indeed in Ireland, which was very different. So just operating on the mainland. And it's really only possible. I think that style of policing doesn't create a high trust society. It's a product of a high trust society. And as soon as that high trust society starts to falter, you can't police like that anymore, at least not without experiencing what you did, which I think was kind of the early stages of this real collapse in law and order because the police just could fix it but choose not to. And the chattering classes support them in choosing not to.
Yeah, yeah. This makes me think of a lot of layers to the story that you hear, especially on the right wing, about kind of the revitalization of the West and all of this through the importation of norms that are still active in the third world. And the problems that you have there are just that a lot of the norms that you have in the West, alongside the technical progress and the institutions that have been built and all this type of stuff, it kind of comes hand in hand. Like I don't think you can have white Sharia and you know the technical industrial revolution type civilization. Yeah, I think it's hard to disentangle what exactly it is that makes things work in the way it does. And maybe yes, like you're right that light touch policing, there's also obviously something tied to individual dignity, all of this stuff that shows up in the legal system and in policing,
Yeah.
and all the rights that people convicted, people accused have in the West, which is just not the case in other countries. And if you look at relative crime statistics, I mean, the West is still quite a peaceful area compared to other regions, which have more draconian laws, but they also have a lot more disorder for whatever social reasons that they do.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not great to be caught in the middle of it. To be the one person who gets it, who gets, coincidentally stabbed because there's, the soft touch policing. But at the same time, this is an outgrowth. It's one of the branches of the technological and moral civilization that the West has built. I hope that there are ways to create safeguards and to maybe roll back some of the things that have gone wrong without scrapping the whole edifice, because it's something that, like I said, we've been aspiring to since I knew that it existed, in the form of Western Europe. But yeah, it's tough to have it piecemeal.
This is not the end of the episode. Actually, we're only halfway through, but the rest of the show is behind a paywall. In the extended version, Alex and I spoke about how Anglo norms are now undermining the Anglosphere, whether the right is really capable of governance, and how access to taboo information on the internet has changed politics. While you can, of course, listen to MMM wherever you get your podcasts, the true home of the show is to be found at louiseperry.substack.com. That's where you can find not only the extended version of this episode, but also the extended versions of hundreds of MMM podcasts, plus the weekly bonus episodes I record with other Substackers and the MMM chat community. This is a listener-supported podcast. I am utterly reliant on paid subscribers to produce the show and to keep the lights on. If you find Maiden Mother Matriarch valuable, the most helpful possible thing that you can do is to sign up for a paid subscription at louiseperry.substack.com. Thank you.